What makes a better brisket, an offset smoker or a pellet grill? Whether you're a diehard stick burner or an unrepentant pellet head, this experiment will interest you because the answer might not be what you expected. So let's get smoking. Welcome to the Smoke Lab, guys, the show where I do barbecue experiments that you would never do at home so you can learn from my trial and error. And as always, if you have any requests for experiments, feel free to drop them in the comment section below. And all of the recipes and times and temperatures are in the description section below if you want to follow along. Now, pellet grills. Some people absolutely love them for their convenience, and some people hate them. They say that they don't impart enough smoke flavor, and they call them all sorts of nasty things like pellet poopers and easy bake ovens, which, as an aside, I've cooked a brisket in an easy bake oven, and pellet grills do a much better job. So who's right? Well, the best way I can think of to settle this debate is to cook a brisket on each one and see which one tastes better. Here's my hypothesis for this video, and I'm gonna read this off my script because it's a little bit of a mouthful. My hypothesis is that the offset smoker brisket will be better because pellets are very dry and burn too efficiently, while offset smokers burn full splits of flavorful hardwood at temperatures throughout the combustion spectrum, and as a result, they produce more flavorful smoke compounds. That's what the science says anyway, but let's see if it holds up in a real-life experiment. For this experiment, we're cooking two briskets, one on the Oklahoma Joe's Longhorn and one on the Rider DLX Pellet Grill. Starting with the pellet grill brisket, I'm preparing a rub of a 1/4 cup kosher salt, a 1/4 cup of coarse black pepper, and a tablespoon of Lawry's seasoned salt. I'm spraying a bit of vegetable oil in to prevent separation of the smaller particles, giving it a shake, and then whipping out my brisket. This is a choice grade Angus brisket, nothing fancy. I trimmed it the night before, and now I'm going to sprinkle it all over with this rub mixture I made, and when it's nicely coated, I'm going to let it sit on the counter for a while I head out to the Rider. Now, it's 10 p.m. in the evening, and I'm setting the temperature to the lowest setting it will go to. The sear smoke handle is set to smoke, by the way. Now, opening up the lid, you'll see I have a very large water pan on the lower grill. Well, it's kind of large. This water pan is actually smaller than I would normally use, and I suggest you use one that's much larger, but it's all I had. That water pan is going to soak up the radiant heat coming from below that normally destroys briskets. That's our first line of defense. The brisket goes on the upper rack as high up as possible. That's our second line of defense against the radiant heat. So the brisket only gets exposed to nice, gentle convective heat, just like an offset smoker. Now, fast forward to the next morning at 8 a.m., this brisket has seen 10 hours of smoke at a very low temperature of around 175 degrees Fahrenheit, which allows the pellets to combust less efficiently and produce more smoke flavor as a result and get better bark on the brisket. So now that we've got some smoke flavor and some bark, I'm increasing the temperature on the smoker to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, normally cooking a brisket at 300 degrees Fahrenheit on a pellet grill would absolutely turn it into beef jerky. It would just destroy the brisket. But because we have the water pan and some standoff distance, it's on the upper rack of the pellet grill, it's protected and it can take some of that radiant heat from below and disperse it back into the cook chamber. And all that you're left with is the nice, hot, gentle convective heat that is hitting the top of the brisket and rendering the fat cap, which is very important because we want to properly render the fat cap so it's kind of caramelly and yellow in consistency, and you should see that it starts bubbling at some point, and that's how you know that you're properly rendering it. Now, an hour later, it's 9 a.m., and I'm turning the brisket around to help it cook more evenly. 2 hours later, it's 10 a.m., and I'm adding some ice water to the water pan. You can see how the fat cap is kind of bubbling. Like I said before, that's a good sign that tells me the fat cap is getting enough heat. Maybe too much heat on the flat side of the brisket, so I'm foiling it just to help prevent it from cooking too quickly. If you had a larger water pan, though, it would prevent a lot of that radiant heat from getting to that flat. It's just that my water pan is smaller than the footprint of the brisket. And finally, an hour later at 11 a.m., it could take longer for you, I'm checking on the brisket and it's probing at least 190 everywhere I probe, 195 in the flat, 190 in the point, maybe 189 or 188 in the deepest part of the brisket, but that's okay. As long as it's around 190 on average, it's good to go. And now it's going to come off the smoker, get wrapped in butcher paper with some tallow and clarified butter, and then placed in a foil pan with a 1/4 cup of water added to help render all of the fat and collagen. It's tightly foiled, and then it gets rested for 2 hours until the internal temperature comes down below 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it goes back on the Rider, which I've left running on the lowest smoke setting at 175 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to hold on the Rider at that low temperature until I'm ready to slice into it at dinner time. Now, moving on to the offset smoker brisket, I'm not going to go into detail about how I cooked cooked it because I did another Smoke Labs video on it on the Oklahoma Joe's YouTube channel. I'll link it below in the description section, and you can find the full recipe in that video. But basically, I smoke at 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 hours, then I bump it up to 285 degrees Fahrenheit for 8 hours, or until the brisket is at least 190 degrees internal everywhere I probe, and then I wrap it in butcher paper with clarified butter and beef tallow, put it in a foil pan with a 1/4 cup of water, foil it tightly, and hold it at 150 degrees for 15 to 20 hours before I slice into it. Now, I started holding the offset smoker brisket the night before so I could compare both briskets back to back. So let's do that now, starting with the offset smoker brisket. All right, guys, I just unwrapped this brisket. This was the brisket that came off the offset smoker, and it was holding in my holding chest for the past 18 hours at 150. It's looking really nice. It's got a nice dark bark. It's got a really nice smoky smell. The bark looks really texturally on point. The fat is perfectly rendered. It's got some nice yellow squishy fat. So I'm happy with this brisket in general, and it's looking like the epitome of what I would expect an offset smoker brisket to look like. So let's slice into this, we'll taste it, and then we'll compare it to the pellet smoker brisket. I'm gonna slice it right down the middle. Slicing really nicely. I can tell it's really tender. I'll give you guys a nice close-up of this. That is looking crazy good. Oh my God. That is looking really nice. Let's give this thing a taste. Smoky, tender, offset smoker flavor. It's amazing. And also, if you guys look right there, you can see how the fat is nice and rendered. It's got that yellow caramelly type consistency, and it tastes absolutely amazing. All right, guys, this is the pellet grill brisket. So we're going to open this up and see what it looks like, and we'll compare it to the offset smoker brisket, see if there's any differences. Good sign so far. Feels tender when I put my fingers under it, and it's looking pretty darn good. All right, let's take a look at this brisket. First of all, I've noticed that the flat curled up a little bit there. I'm not sure if that happened during the cook or just because I wrapped it a bit too tightly. Probably because I wrapped it a bit too tightly, but the fat actually is looking really nice. You can see that in this area that it's come up a little bit, you can see that the fat is yellow. It's nice and caramelized. It's gonna be super tasty. If I press into it, it's kind of bouncy, to be honest. A little bit more than the offset smoker brisket. If I push down here, it springs back a little bit more easily. Push down, springs back a little bit more. This fat might be a little bit less rendered than the offset smoker brisket, but it's really flexible. It's a nice wobbly brisket. It cooked really evenly. If you look at the flat here, there's not too many burnt edges. The hump here on the point, it's actually surprisingly soft. And I think that's because all the heat was coming from below and it didn't see much heat up here. So as a result, the point was a little bit softer. And I think the bottom of the flat here got a little bit tougher. I can really tap on this and it kind of feels like it might be kind of tough when I cut into that. But we're gonna find out soon when we cut into this. Okay, let's get a cutting board here. You guys didn't think I would cut right on this stone surface. I've got too many nasty YouTube comments about that to make that mistake again. Okay, let's slice into this. I want to slice it that way. I'll slice it right down the middle. It's actually slicing better than the offset smoker brisket sliced. I think this is going to be a little bit more well done than the offset smoker brisket in terms of tenderness. Might be a little bit overdone. I hope not, though. The bottom actually in the middle cut really well. Sometimes if you don't do a pellet grill brisket really well, you'll know because when you slice into the brisket, you'll have to chop through the bottom layer that got pretty much burnt to a crisp by all the radiant heat. If you're cooking, for example, on a pellet grill that doesn't have a water pan underneath it and it's not on the top rack, that's happened to me many a time. So let's open this up. This is actually looking quite nice. And I would say that's a pretty nice looking brisket. What do you guys think? Okay, let's put that to the side. We'll take a slice of the flat here. Take a slice right off of the thickest part of the flat. And yeah, I had to chop through a little bit, so I think the bottom saw a little bit too much heat, but it looks pretty nice. Look at that. That is absolutely amazing. I'll pull it apart here. Ooh, beautiful. Let's take a bite. The fat is actually nicely rendered if you look at it. Now, I said before that sometimes on a pellet smoker brisket, you don't get really well rendered fat because the heat is all coming from below. But if you look here, there's quite a bit of yellow fat. It looks like it's been rendered pretty well. I squish it, comes apart easily. That's a good thing. It's good. Now, in terms of smoke flavor, I'm just smelling the bark. It does have a lot of smoke flavor. Surprisingly, it's comparable to the Offset Smoker Brisket. The Offset Smoker Brisket had more of a smoke flavor, but this is pretty smoky because of that overnight smoke. You get quite a lot of smoke flavor on this thing. Okay, let's cut some burnt ends off here. Whoops. Yeah, the bottom of the brisket is a little bit crunchy, but this point looks good. Those burnt ends there are looking delicious. Let's take a slice off of here. Bit of a thicker one. Oh yeah, that's what I like. Yes, please. Oh my lord, that is gonna be tasty. Let's pull it apart. Pulls apart so easily. And let's take a bite. Mmm. Ho 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 ho! Man, that tastes good. Guys, I'm telling you, if you do a pellet smoker brisket the right way with all the tricks that I showed you in this video, the water pan on the second rack, you do it overnight with a low and slow smoke, and then you boost it up to 300 degrees for the last couple hours, and then you do a really low and slow hold to finish it off. It makes brisket that people are gonna hate me for saying this, comparable to Offset Smoker Brisket. I'm serious. This brisket is just as good as the Offset Smoker Brisket. The only thing I would say is that it has a little bit less smoke flavors. So if you're not smoke blind like I am from smoking brisket for the last 2 days and being inundated with smoke in my lungs and nose at all times, then you might taste the difference. But for me, I don't taste much of a difference. All I really notice is the salt, the rub, the tenderness of the brisket, and it's a little bit less smoky than the Offset Smoker Brisket. The one thing I would say is that if you look closely here, you can see that the fat is not as well rendered as the Offset Smoker Brisket. It's a little bit more white, and it's only got a thinner layer of that yellow, really well caramelized and rendered fat. So that is a big reason why I like Offset Smokers better than pellet smokers. You can get better fat cap rendering because you're getting top down heat instead of bottom up heat. Also, the disadvantage of a pellet grill is that you get a little bit of a crustier underside of the brisket. Even with that water pan protecting it, a lot of radiant heat and heat from the steam evaporating from the water pan is going to get to the underside of the brisket. It'll overcook it a little bit, but this was actually pretty good, and it only had a really thin layer of crusty overcooked meat on the bottom. And third, another disadvantage of the pellet grill brisket is that it has a little bit less smoke flavor, but if you eat a lot of brisket and you're around smokers all the time, you're probably not going to taste much of a difference. Your guests might, but personally, I think that it tastes amazing. It tastes smoky, not as smoky as an Offset Smoker brisket, but still pretty good. And I would eat this any day of the week for sure. And guys, finally, you know what pairs really well with a brisket? Scotch. Cheers. Balanced honey, citrusy flavor with a hint of almond. I'm just kidding, guys. That's what it literally says on the back of the bottle. Thanks for watching, guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you think about pellet grill briskets versus Offset Smoker briskets. Let me know in the comment section below. And please subscribe to the Oklahoma Joe's YouTube channel if you haven't already, so you get notified whenever new Smoke Lab videos come out. And if you like my crazy barbecue experiments, you can also check out my channel, Smoke Trails Barbecue, on YouTube. Until next time, happy smoking.